Everyone, including your opponent, has congratulated you on your stunning victory in Pennsylvania yesterday. In the course of the program Face the Nation on Sunday, you said you hoped to win because you had adopted the strategy of hammering away at the differences between you and Mr. Reagan. And one difference you mentioned was, you said in your words, was Mr. Reagan was over-promising the American people. Could you explain that? And when the spirit moves you, could you respond?
First, it was Meet the Press. I don't want to put in a plug for the wrong outfit. And secondly, I also made the point that what we must do is defeat Jimmy Carter. I mean, I got that into focus, and that I wanted to get these differences out with the governor so the voters could make a good determination. I hope that's what happened in Pennsylvania. A big difference, for example, that the governor and I have regards this tax cut. He feels, I don't want to put words in his mouth, and he's here to defend or explain his position, that you can cut taxes by $70 billion the first year. The Wall Street Journal attributed the figure to that tax cut idea to $90 billion the first year. Cut inheritance and gift taxes. We've computed that at $5.4 billion. And still balance the budget and still increase defense spending. President Kennedy suggested this cut. It was implemented by Johnson. The cut was $11.4 billion. It resulted in a $4.4 billion revenue loss. Inflation then was 1.8%. Today it's 18. Investor confidence was out there. Today there's none. So in my judgment, that economic program would exacerbate the deficit. It would result in less stimulation of the economy because of the conditions. And I believe that before we can have massive across-the-board tax cuts, we've got to get the budget in balance. So I am proposing a $20 billion, as opposed to 70 or 90, supply-side tax cut to stimulate savings for home, to stimulate business. That is a major difference. There's plenty of others, but I do want to give the governor a chance to respond.
Governor?
That is indeed a major difference, and I still believe firmly, and I think there are some differences of opinion about figures. 4 times in this century we have had across-the-board tax cuts, all of which have resulted in such an increase in prosperity that the government, even in the first year, got increased revenues, not less. In the Kennedy year, the total revenues for government, and of course government was much smaller then, about $109 billion instead of the 600 that will be coming up in '81. But according to the figures then, the federal government got some $5 billion in additional revenue and got about $1.1 billion additional revenue in the income tax. But let me point something out. George mentioned the differences here. Under Jimmy Carter, the tax burden as a percentage of the gross national product has reached the highest level in the history of our nation. It is also the highest percentage of personal income that it has ever been in our history. Now, under the President's revised '81 budget, the total federal taxes are projected as $628 billion. Of that, 283.1 will be individual income tax. That's a 115% increase in that tax since he took office. Now, over the next 10 years, if things aren't changed, it is estimated that the total tax increase on the people of America will be $1.5 trillion. Now, rather than the Kemp-Roth bill, which I support, the idea of a 10% cut across the board, the income tax, administered over a 3-year period to a total of 30%, I believe will stimulate the economy, will create jobs, but it will not reduce federal incomes. It will only reduce the increase in taxes, because we're going to be faced with an increase in taxes that is far beyond our comprehension right now. And if we figured that cut as a percentage of $628 billion, you would be reducing the first year less than 5%, perhaps about 4% in the total tax revenues that the government is going to be getting. But I believe at the same time, history has proven in all those other tax cuts, I believe that will stimulate the economy, more people will be working, and it will be contrary to the Carter policy now of fighting inflation by adding millions to the unemployment rolls. And so I support and stand by the idea of incentive taxes geared to the free enterprise system that will provide incentive to increase productivity so we can compete in the international market, which we can't do on even terms today.
I agree with that, but the difference we have is that it is my understanding the Kennedy tax cut implemented by Lyndon Johnson resulted in a $4.4 billion deficit. And inflation then was 1.8, not 18%. Investor confidence was high, not low. And it is my perception that that tax cut applied today in the same percentages, the same numbers, would result in a inflation rate of about 30 to 32%. And so I couldn't agree more about the percent of our gross national product taken by taxes. But I believe the first thing we must do is get in balance. Incidentally, not the way Jimmy Carter proposes, by higher and higher taxes. Get in balance by the reduction of expenditures, get in balance by a $20 billion supply side tax cut, and then begin to reduce rates. But if we risk, with investor confidence where it is, a deficit that's going to be up already, I think, $37 billion, $30 billion on top of that, I'm afraid we can't break inflation. And we've got to do that and do it fast.
Well, George, we've got to do that, and of course it goes without saying. And I certainly believe in reducing the cost of government far more than the phony decrease that Mr. Carter has proposed. But when you suggested, as you have, about a $20 billion tax cut,
Right.
That is less than the federal government is going to get in a single year, undeserved, from people that just received cost of living pay raises and were pushed up into higher tax brackets. That amounts to more than $20 billion.
But if we get that in balance and then do what I say, start reducing the rates, that is the key thing. Your plan, in my judgment, and the judgment of many economists, would risk exacerbating that deficit. And today, our creditors abroad, our economy is linked to foreign economies. And they take a look at us and see us living at deficit after deficit. You cite the Kennedy tax cut. There wasn't any surplus then. There was a deficit resulted from that scheme. Arthur Laffer, the economist that proposed it, he himself says, I don't know whether it would work. I don't believe we can take that kind of risk, Governor.
Well, George,
and I would not propose it.
George, how much more risk is there in just going along with what we've been
That's
doing?
not what I've proposed. I've proposed something very different than just going along.
Let me just say one other thing. I've heard for a great many years that we can't possibly reduce taxes. This is Washington's cry.
I agree.
We can't reduce taxes until we reduce government spending. And I have to point out that government does not tax to get the money it needs. Government always needs the money it gets. Now, your son can be extravagant with his allowance, and you can lecture him day after day about saving money and not being extravagant, or you can solve the problem by cutting his allowance.
But the program I'm putting forward is